The X-Men's deadliest villain has returned. It's not Jean Grey, and the ending of this comic is gonna blow your minds. So what this does is this picks up with the old school X-Men from way back in the day when they first became a team. And while they're in the middle of fighting Plant Man, who's about as useless as tits on a boar hog, that they're suddenly whisked away by Jean Grey as the Phoenix Force. Now, they're taken to simply what's described as elsewhere and elsewhen. I would go so far as to argue that they're probably in the far shore, the place beyond all space and time within the Marvel multiverse, or really outside the Marvel multiverse. But what they're told by this version of Jean is she is not the Jean from their timeline, and she explicitly says that Phoenix replaced Jean Grey, became unstable, and committed mass murder. In my reality, it was different. Those of you guys who are eagle-eyed readers of Marvel Comics will be able to tell right off the bat, this is the all-new X-Men team. Now, for those of you guys who don't know what that means, right? We covered the story recently where Cyclops went nuts, got the Phoenix Force, and just train wrecked the Avengers and the X-Men at the same time. There'll be a link to the video at the end of this if you guys want to check it out. He like dominates. I mean, it's not even close, right? He just dominates both teams by himself. It's nuts. But during the time when that happened, specifically between 2013 and 2015, when Cyclops full-on became a bad guy, Beast went into the past, grabbed the X-Men when they were younger, and then brought them back to the modern era in order to show Cyclops where he lost his way. It didn't really work, and if anything, he entrenched himself further, but they were ultimately sent back to the past, and they had more or less been there ever since. This is the team that Jean is visiting, right? Now, here's the cool thing. What she says is that there is a threat there to the entirety of the multiverse, and she says that threat is the Phoenix. She's lying, just so you guys know. She's not telling the truth, but what she says is a different Phoenix in a different universe. Things happened entirely different. That version of Jean Grey, technically it's Earth 696 is where we're going. In that universe, Jean Grey became the Phoenix. The difference here is that when she did, she went nuts, and her and the X-Men wiped out every single threat that came across their path. She even killed Thanos, which is not really surprising considering how powerful the Phoenix Force is. But she says, you guys have a shot because you are the younger members of this X-Men team. Now here's what she's talking about, right? Because I know that based on what we said, it almost sounds like it's contradictory. In Marvel Comics, those of you guys who were new, you have the main Marvel universe, Earth 616, right? Every comic that you've ever read from Marvel takes place in that universe. Then you have alternate realities that branch off the main Marvel universe, but these always are based on some kind of an event, something along those lines. So the current X-Men team as it exists in Marvel Comics, this is the younger version of that team. It's also the younger version of the Earth 696 universe X-Men team, because in that reality, as we've covered here, things transpire differently. So it basically became an alternate universe, a what if timeline, whatever you want to call it, right? That's how all this stuff transpires. And so what this Jean says is that she's powerful enough that she was able to take down Mephisto and Dormammu at the exact same time, but she cannot go and face off against this other version of Jean, because if that were to happen, that version of Jean would steal her portion of the Phoenix Force, and in doing that would take off to the multiverse and become unstoppable, which is true. In fact, there is an alternate reality story where Jean gets the Phoenix Force, becomes the Dark Phoenix, and destroys the entirety of the universe, right? So that's the level of the power that you're talking about here. What we end up finding out is in Earth 696, in that reality, that effectively Magneto had just become a straight up villain, right? And that what ended up happening is he declared war on both the X-Men and the Avengers, and then he killed Charles Xavier. When that happened, Jean Grey completely let go and shut down the mind of Magneto. And she says in this universe, Jean began calling herself the Phoenix very soon afterwards, much earlier than any other universe where Jean became the Phoenix. And so Earth 696's Jean Grey and her fellow X-Men, heartsick over all the suffering and loss they'd seen trying to realize Professor Xavier's dream, decided to continue using more decisive methods to bring peace between mutants and humans. Those who hated and feared mutants abruptly changed their ways. Those who threatened mutants or humans were dealt with decisively. So Ultron, any of those forces out there were annihilated by Jean Grey, even Annihilus, right? Those of you guys who don't know who Annihilus is, this guy led the Annihilation Wave. To give you perspective, the story Annihilation picks up with the universe losing the war. All the superheroes on Earth are dealing with civil war at that point in time, but like people are just fleeing, right? Peter Quill, Star-Lord, Richard Rider, Nova, they're just like fleeing for their lives, grabbing refugees where they can and trying to survive. By the time the story came to an end, something like 2/3 of the universe had been conquered and in some capacity destroyed by Annihilus and the Annihilation Wave. That's how powerful this guy was. Jean Grey deals with him like that. The other thing here is that Tony Stark was staunchly against what the X-Men were doing. Not really the nature of mutants, but he saw them, along with the other Avengers, as a credible threat. Suddenly, Tony Stark changes his mind, right? It all kind of switches. And what we're told here is that there were whispers about brainwashing, but no one whispered too loudly or they ended up the same way. Because Jean Grey with the Phoenix, regardless of what universe she's in, is one of the most powerful telepaths, if not the most powerful telepath in that particular universe. And so the idea is to grab this younger X-Men team to send them to the Earth 696 universe to deal with that version of Jean and basically find a way to stop her so she doesn't threaten all of existence anymore. Now, like I said, Jean is not the villain. It seems like she is. It's gonna look like she is, but she's not. And so once they end up getting to this new universe, to Earth 696, they come across the apartment of Warren Worthington, also known as Angel. The guy has the power of wings. He literally just flies around. He's kind of cool, but his real superpower is that he's just super rich. But you also have Iceman Bobby Drake there. Now, even the X-Men in their younger ages know to be careful around Iceman. Part of this is just because of Bobby Drake being a member of their own team, albeit from the past and what he's capable of, but also having gone to the future, they see the level of power that Iceman will eventually develop. He's an Omega level mutant. This guy could wipe out all life on Earth and potentially across the universe, depending on how far reaching his powers go and what kind of amplification he gets. Remember, he slows down the movement of molecules and atoms, right? That's literally the core of his power. Imagine being able to bring the molecular movement of the universe to a standstill, right? I mean, that's potentially the level of power he could reach at some point in the entirety of his life. Who knows if he ever actually will. But the fact is, they know to give this guy a wide berth. When Warren Worthington, the actual Warren Worthington from this universe, shows up, things go sideways kind of fast, a little bit of a fight breaks out, but it's nowhere near as interesting as the fight with Iceman, because this guy solos the X-Men by himself, right? This guy takes them all on. In fact, it takes Jean Grey with her telepathic power stepping in and forcing Bobby Drake to stop by giving him an ultimatum, right? If you really are going to kill me, that's fine. I'm not going to stop you, but at least hear me out. And if for no other reason than the fact that it's just honor among potential other X-Men or mutants that exist out there, he ultimately ends up hearing her out. And that's when she kind of spills the beans on what's going on. Jean Grey in your universe is a bad guy. She's a villain. She's doing villainous things. She's brainwashing anybody that stands against the X-Men and the mutant population. Any force out there that cannot be brainwashed just gets annihilated. She's not the superhero that you think she is. Now, Iceman and Angel are just kind of like, I mean, there's no way that's really true, right? We would know if that were the case, right? If she was brainwashing people or something like that. And that's when the question's asked, how do you know she hasn't brainwashed you? The only way to really know is to allow me to enter into your heads. Now, initially, Bobby Drake is like, not a chance, that's never gonna happen. But Angel's just kind of like, I mean, give it a shot. Let's see what happens, right? The worst that can happen is that it turns out that, you know, maybe she did. And it turns out that she did, right? It wasn't overt. It wasn't one of those things where she tied him to a chair and telepathically controlled them. It was just a nudge here, a nudge there. And it's even one of the cases that Angel makes here, right? He says, you watch people you love suffer and die. You suffer yourself, worse than you ever imagined was possible. You sacrifice everything to make things better. And not only do they not get better, it all gets worse. So one day you compromise just a little, just this once, then you do it again. After a while, you tell yourself it was for the best, the only way, and you actually believe it. Now, this was not really Jean Grey manipulating him into having those thoughts. it's how she got in. It was the crack in the doorway, right? The crack in the wall that allowed her to kind of enter in and then start manipulating those thoughts and start pushing the X-Men in the direction of just one more concession, just one more person captured, just one more instance where you don't ask questions. And that's how things end up that way, right? And so what you do is you switch over to Hank McCoy facing off against Beast. Now, here's one of the cool things that some of you guys may or may not know about. I know old school Marvel readers probably know about this, but new folks don't. Beast did not always have furry skin. In fact, that's the result of things just going sideways for his character. Originally, he was just a guy with giant hands and feet, and he was super acrobatic. I mean, he's still just as useless as he ever was, but like, the fact is, right, he can just kind of bounce around and that sort of thing. He's super smart, which I guess is cool, you know, whatever. But the big question they have here is, how are they going to handle Cyclops? Because in every universe that's out there in the multiverse, when it comes to Cyclops and Jean, they are an inseparable force. One does not simply walk up to Cyclops and say, hey man, so you gotta break up with Jean, because like, it turns out she's crazy and she's killing and brainwashing people, right? Cyclops is gonna be like, oh, okay, cool. Well, in that case, I mean, you know, Jean, we're done. You know, that's not gonna happen, right? Like, he will fight kicking and screaming to stay alongside Jean Grey. And so when they approach him with this information, he is immediately in denial. But where Angel and Iceman try to reason with him, they end up bringing in the original X-Men. And that's when he sees the original Jean Grey, the younger Jean Grey, and he knows that like, they're kind of telling the truth. He didn't want to admit it, but he knows it's true. But then the actual Earth 696 Jean Grey shows up on the scene. And this chick dominates them all. I mean, just like that, it's not even close, right? She just seizes control of them and is like, you guys are done. I'm gonna wipe your memories, I'm gonna send you home, and then we're gonna deal with this here. Then I'm gonna go after the person that sent you here, right? That's the thing to understand about Jean Grey, right? Like when Jean Grey, when she was the Dark Phoenix, she'd kill you and the man next to you, right? She'd kill you just for inconveniencing her, right? You go after this girl, she's gonna go after you and anybody that you ever met, right? I mean, it was hardcore, man. This chick did not care. And Jean is the exact same way in this universe. And so what ends up happening is that all the X-Men come to attack Jean. And that's when the younger version of Jean Grey looks at Earth 696 Jean and says, you are not me. I don't know who you are. I don't know why you're taking on this form, but we were told you are the person that I become in this universe. You are not me. You were never me. There's no way that I end up becoming this person, even if I do become the Dark Phoenix, because I've seen what happens when I get the Dark Phoenix, and I would never even do anything like this. Cyclops even looks at it and says, you're not her, right? Like, I've known for a long time, I've never really wanted to believe it, but deep down, I've always known you're not her, which means I'm also not me. I'm not here. I'm not alive. I'm some kind of figment, some kind of creation. And that's when Earth 696 Jean is like, then you're not of much use here, are you? And just destroys him on the spot. And that's when she manifests into her actual form. She says, I didn't plan to do this yet. Man, son, I'm telling y'all, I didn't plan to do this yet. I wanted to be truly all-powerful first, but I'm capable of creating my own body. I'm as a god compared to any other being on this planet. So why wait? And when Angel is totally left in shock, we end up finding out it's this universe's version of Onslaught. I told you guys, you were never gonna see this coming. I told you guys, man. Now, for those of you guys who don't know about Onslaught, right? Like, the explanation's kind of given pretty quickly here in the moment, right? Onslaught, there's one of these in our future, a combo of the dark sides of Professor X and Magneto, created when the professor shut down Magneto's mind, and your Jean Grey did the exact same thing. Of course, it would lead to Onslaught. Onslaught is a ridiculously overpowered villain in Marvel Comics. This guy sees the power of Nate Gray, which just elevated him to this level of telepathy and telekinesis that was unrivaled. Then he took over Franklin Richards, the son of Reed Richards, and because Franklin had the ability to alter reality, Onslaught gained the ability to alter reality. This dude was Cell from Dragon Ball, just absorbing folks and taking their powers. At the height of Onslaught's abilities, he was just a form of pure energy that was basically indestructible. We do have a link to the Onslaught video, which we did cover it if you ever want to see what happens with this guy, because like a whole new universe gets created because of Onslaught. It's crazy. But like, all the X-Men go to attack this guy, and as you would expect, Onslaught one-shots them all. Because when the question's asked why it is that like Onslaught didn't manifest before, why it is that he took on the form of Jean, he says, because fear of the Phoenix is universal. That's why I adopted the role. Even though the Phoenix Force never came near this world, the truly cosmic forces of the universe knew I was not on their level. Those just below them were afraid to challenge the Phoenix, buying me time to transcend my origins. All that bloodshed over humanity versus mutant kind, when both are so small. I may not be quite the cosmic force I intend yet, but I'm close enough. I don't need you anymore or this world. So I'll drain every human mind on it, use their mental energy to become the god that I was meant to be. Then my work will really begin. And that's the crazy thing, because again, at the peak of Onslaught's power, and it's hard to kind of power scale, right? Because the nature of power scaling is to just kind of cook the books to get whatever result you want. But the issue is that when you try to power scale Onslaught in that way, it's hard to know, because you could say, well, Franklin Richards was really powerful as a kid, and then he resurrected Galactus from the dead, and you know, Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, and when you get to Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, he doesn't age, and he basically would outlast the universe and be reborn into the next universe alongside Galactus. I mean, it's weird to kind of like try to scale his character, but the argument in saying that he's not as powerful as the highest level cosmic entities, but is close enough to the ones just below them that he can rival them in power and even lead this universe, that's the terrifying thing here. Because what happens is Jean Grey launches a psychic attack against him, and while it is enough to kind of unify the minds of everybody on Earth against Onslaught in order to basically force him out, right, to send him running, at the end of the day, it does work, but it's not enough to kill him. Now, the original Jean Grey from Earth 696, before she was taken over by the Onslaught entity, essentially, she ends up manifesting, which gives just enough time for the original X-Men to basically get out, right? Like to literally make their escape and get away. Because what ends up happening is Jean ends up eradicating the entirety of the universe, right? Like destroys everything. And really, you could argue it's a combination of Jean and Onslaught, but everything is destroyed, right? The kicker about all this is you could believe that Onslaught was killed here. That's not what happens. Right, what ends up going on is the original X-Men are taken back to the far shore. And this version of Jean that brought them all here in the first place says, there was nothing you could have done. Onslaught was too powerful. The eradication of that Earth and that whole universe, it was the only way. And so ultimately the X-Men are just like, wipe our minds and send us home. We don't want to deal with this kind of thing anymore, right? We're tired of this kind of stuff. And Jean obliges, but there is a person there alongside Jean that the X-Men can't see. They don't know this person's there, operating, kind of lurking in the shadows. And this person comes to manifest when they say, the job's not done, Jeannie. Onslaught is not dead. Just hightailed it into the multiverse. You know that. Why'd you send them home? And her argument is, well, because they're kids, and they've earned the right to be kids, or as much of kids as the X-Men possibly can be. They were uniquely qualified to handle this particular crisis, but Onslaught is a completely different matter entirely. That's when we find out the person she's talking to is Wolverine from Earth 295, also known as Weapon X, from the Age of Apocalypse timeline. I told you guys, the ending of this is crazy, because what he's told by Jean is, you'll get all you want and more, but no offense, Logan, you are not enough. To find and end Onslaught, we need more. An entire unit of the best there is at what they do. We need an army of Wolverines. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end because this continues on. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section, and I will catch you all later. Peace.